je crois que notre génération doit savoir que la bête de l'événement est là. Et elle arrive. Et qu'il s'agisse du terrorisme, de cette grande pandémie ou d'autres chocs, il faut la combattre quand elle arrive, avec ce qu'elle a de profondément inattendu, implacable.
As we know, the French president is often compared to Jupiter, the Roman god, in part for his kind of distance from journalists and from the people. Well, now he has descended from Mount Olympus.
Look at the front page of Libération. Must admit, they got very creative today. You can see, this one you have to understand a little bit. Essentially, lots of papers, and Macron himself have compared Macron to the king of all gods, Jupiter. And so what you can see here is it's Manuel Jupiter, so Manupiter, like coined a new word there.
Another portmanteau.
It's a very good portmanteau and a very good drawing there. Jupiter with his tridents there, his, bolts of lightning, ready to get things done. But Libé is worried about this Jupiterian president, worried that public debate will be atrophied while Macron is building this myth of a new savior of France.
Discussing his latest book, The Last President of Europe, Emmanuel Macron's race to revive France and save the world.
And likewise, we have to build a new international order, and this is the biggest challenge of our time.
We need a single global order.
He's the choice of a country desperate for change, a politician who's neither left nor right, part of the French establishment yet never before elected, a fresh face who served in the outgoing government. So who is Emmanuel Macron?
Exudes an air of youthful optimism.
At 44, you are the senior leader of Europe. Is that a comfortable fit?
Yes, because you can have both experience and energy.
The President of France, Emmanuel Macron, will also meet with President Trump in Paris. Macron's calling for a new European army, pan-European army, to defend against Russia, China, and America?
I've been warning for 20 years. They wanted to build a European army. They actually want some of these leaders to destroy NATO.
Why does Europe feel it needs an army? We've got NATO, and all of these countries have their own standing national army. So what would be the point of a European-wide army?
But this guy is stuck with an out-of-date ideology. He wants to build a United States of Europe, and you cannot do that when people have different languages and countries have different histories.
As of now, 9 countries have joined the French effort. Belgium, the United Kingdom, Germany and Denmark, the Netherlands, Estonia, Finland, Spain, and Portugal.
He tells us, secondly, that this nation will rise in a time of unprecedented difficulties in the world. In fact, both Matthew and Luke speak at length about that when they talk about there'll be a time of wars and rumors of wars. There'll be nations rising against nation. There'll be great earthquakes, famines, pestilences, he says, in various places, and fearful events. Nations, he said, will be in anguish and in perplexity, and there'll be the roaring of the sea. I just think it's kind of interesting because as we read in the opening, it says, I saw the beast coming out of the sea. He had 10 horns, 7 heads, and doesn't use any of them, and 10 crowns on his horns. In chapter 17, he explains it to us. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who will, for 1 hour, receive authority as kings along with the beast. Now, all of this is kind of interesting, but it does basically tell us that the final world empire will be composed of 10 nations. In fact, Daniel and also Revelation tells us it's going to be a composite or a confederation of 10 supranations. In other words, not just simply nation states, but supra-states. That is, governments and countries that now may have separate boundaries will be bound together in a new kind of organizational hub. Much of it being economic as opposed to being ethnic or anything else that might link people together in cultures today.
To his supporters, he's their Emmanuel, their political messiah. But he went to France's most prestigious schools, met its most powerful people, and made millions in an investment bank.
He worked for 4 years as an inspector at the Ministry of Economy before moving to the renowned investment bank Rothschild. Macron was quickly parachuted into managing a massive acquisition.
Nestle has agreed to buy Pfizer's infant nutrition business for almost $12 billion.
When the deal went through, he got a big payout.
A former colleague says Macron's rise is partly down to charm, but that at heart he's a secretive man.
Is able to tell people what they really want to hear. So he's a very seductive man, and he managed to agree with nearly anyone. So that's a talent.
Macron's wife Brigitte told one journalist that her husband never let people close. The couple met when she taught him drama at school. Their unusual love affair, a sign, says one of Macron's old friends, of his determination, self-belief and drive.
I think the only person who really know him inside deeply is Brigitte. You have to imagine he seduced her, he convinced her to marry him, he convinced his family. Just imagine, it's real. It's not a small thing.
One more question that fascinates me. The wife of French President Emmanuel Macron, Brigitte, very unusual for her. Now, spoken of when she fell in love with her husband. Now, she was 40 at the time, married, and a teacher. He was just 15 and her student, right? 25-year gap. Now, in Australia, she would risk jail time, to be honest. But she says, oh, well, my head was in a mess. For me, such a young boy was crippling.
I also find it amazing in France, the fact of Macron's age. It is all anyone talks about. 39-year-old president, Emmanuel Macron, 39-year-old president. Did we remind you that he's very young? He is so young. Oh, by the way, he's also really young. I mean, it's just amazing in the country, but it's because he kind of went around the system. If he'd worked kind of within, his own party.
Well, he's the youngest since Napoleon, and so
since
that's my
Napoleon,
favorite.
I know.
Macron was raised in the town of Amiens, 2 hours north of Paris. This is the house he grew up in. The eldest of 3 children from a family of doctors, he attended a Jesuit school. A precocious kid, he preferred the company of teachers to other pupils, and it was at school that he met his future wife.
A woman of 40 had a relationship with a 15-year-old student.
I mean, it should matter because we know what would happen if the roles were reversed, or more accurately, if the genders were reversed in that regard. But it's just creepy. It's strange.
Now, that's actually a reference to the fact that Macron is sort of known for splurging on makeup. Over the course of his first 3 months in office, he's already spent 26,000 euros on his personal makeup artist.
Oh my gosh.
2 years later, Hollande gave him the prestigious position of Minister of Economy. He was 36. But by now, Hollande's public approval rating had fallen to historic lows. Macron threw himself into a plan to loosen economic regulation with testy exchanges in Parliament. But the reforms were disliked and the legislation had to be forced through Parliament, sparking violent protest. Macron increasingly criticized the government but still enjoyed the president's support. Then, last year, he launched his own political movement, En Marche, or On the Move, thrusting him into the national spotlight.
He's really come out of nowhere. 3 years ago, Emmanuel Macron was barely known to the general public, and here he is today on the verge of becoming president.
Emmanuel Macron wants to put Europe at the center of the world again.
Following America's $90 billion aid package to Ukraine, the French president said Europe mustn't rely entirely on the US for its protection. With 3 years left on his second term, Macron outlined his vision for a more assertive European Union on the global stage.
We have to be clear about the fact that our Europe today is mortal. It could die. It could die, and that depends solely on our choices.
But faced with intense skepticism from a majority of EU countries, for now the project remains one of cooperation rather than of combination. Eastern countries, so far, preferring to place their trust in NATO under American protection. Eurosceptic nationalist movements throughout the EU also doing their part to cut short Macron's ambitions.
A reaction to the French president's comments 2 days before the anniversary of October 7th that shipments of weapons to Israel for use in Gaza should be stopped, while countries pushed for a ceasefire.
But Macron also criticized the hypocrisy of some nations calling for a ceasefire, while also supplying the weapons that are enabling the war to continue.
If we call for a ceasefire, what's consistent is to not provide weapons of war. And I think that those who supply them cannot call for a ceasefire every day and continue to supply them.
Meanwhile, some analysts criticized his position as lacking coherence. On the one hand, pushing for a ceasefire and a two-state solution, and at the same time reaffirming Israel's right to self-defense.
Vous n'êtes pas seul.
And even suggesting an international coalition to fight Hamas on a visit to Israel last year.
You talked about Jerusalem.
Yes, exactly.
Before.
Yes.
And he said what?
He said that probably he will announce the fact that he wanted to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
And you told him what?
I told him I thought it was a mistake, because we've worked all together on the recognition of two states, Israel and Palestine, with borders recognized by the international community, and that such a unilateral decision is not compliant with our international discussions and our international rules, and will not facilitate a peace process.
Encore une fois, soyons là aussi explicites, ce n'est en aucun cas un appel à désarmer Israël contre les menaces qui s'exercent contre ce pays et ce peuple ami, mais un appel à stopper toute déstabilisation supplémentaire dans cette partie du monde. La stabilité, la paix ne viendront que par les solutions diplomatiques. C'est d'ailleurs la raison pour laquelle la France a appelé de ses vœux de cesser les exportations d'armes qui sont utilisées sur ces théâtres de guerre. D'autres dirigeants ici ont fait de même. Et nous le savons tous, c'est l'unique levier qui pourra aujourd'hui y mettre un terme. Forces armées libanaises comme des forces de sécurité intérieure. Enfin, évoquant le Liban, avec les premiers ministres italiens et espagnols qui représentent, comme la France, des contributeurs historiques à la FINUL, je veux dire ici que les 700 soldats français engagés dans cette force sont le signe de notre soutien indéfectible et de notre volonté d'être engagés à la sécurité tout à la fois d'Israël et du Liban. Il est donc tout à fait inacceptable de voir les troupes de la FINUL visées délibérément par les forces armées.
We've just witnessed this week is the President of France, speaking on behalf of the European Union, just broke off its relationship with the United States. He just announced there's a divorce on the way. And Mr. Macron wants to be the president of Europe. He wants a European army. He wants those NATO military bases to be converted to an EU army military base. And he wants to be the president of a European Union superstate. That's been the plan all along. Remember who he worked for before he became president of France. He worked for the Rothschilds. He is a stalking horse for the Rothschilds. And they need to solidify Europe into a superstate.
La bête de l'événement est là. Et elle arrive. Et qu'il s'agisse du terrorisme, de ces grandes pandémies ou d'autres chocs, il faut la combattre quand elle arrive, avec ce qu'elle a de profondément inattendu, implacable. Il faut le faire en restant conforme à ses principes et n'en rien céder, mais en étant disponible à l'événement pour qu'advienne quelque chose de nouveau. C'est aussi ça. Et donc voilà, j'ai des convictions. Je ne lâcherai jamais la liberté, les principes démocratiques et ce qui font nos peuples devant quoi que ce soit et quelque ennemi que ce soit. Et en même temps, je pense que ces moments-là sont ceux qui nous permettent aussi d'inventer peut-être quelque chose de nouveau pour notre humanité. Ce qu'on a dessiné au travers de cette discussion, c'est-à-dire un équilibre nouveau dans l'interdépendance des femmes et des hommes pour penser ce qu'est l'être au monde et qui est fait autour de l'éducation, de la santé et de l'environnement. Et donc je suis dans cet état d'esprit-là, prêt à me battre et à essayer à la fois de porter ce en quoi je crois et d'avoir cette part de disponibilité pour essayer de comprendre ce qui paraissait impensable. Et il faut avoir cette part de disponibilité, y compris intellectuelle, je dirais personnelle, aussi sensible, pour accepter l'événement tel qu'il arrive et pas le mettre dans une catégorie tout de suite, parce que je pense que nos peuples le vivent aussi très profondément. Et nous sommes tous en train de le vivre comme ça, donc il faut accepter que ça nous change.
sans pouvoir tout dire sur ce que ça change en nous. Et donc c'est pour ça qu'il faut avoir il faut essayer d'avoir tout à la fois de l'humilité et de la détermination.
It was Daniel, the statesman prophet, who first began to outline the flow of human history as a succession of empires. It's important to know that nobody else had ever looked at the world in that way until Daniel wrote it in his prophecies. And particularly in chapters 2 and again in chapter 7, he identified 4 historical empires. He forecast them coming into the world, and sure enough, they fit in perfect order. In his own day was a Babylonian empire. He said be followed by a lesser kingdom called the Persian Empire, and then came the Grecian Empire, and lastly, the Roman Empire. But this 4th empire, it'll be basically Roman Empire 4.2 that will be in force in the world. And it's this, particularly the last part of this development of what the book of Revelation refers to as the kingdom of the beast. And the word beast there, therion in Greek, literally means a ferocious, brutal, savage beast. And it's essentially this kingdom that rests upon this universal global governance that will have such an impact upon the earth and those who live on it. It was a prophet Daniel who tells us a great deal about the character of this final kingdom that is coming. That the Bible says there will be introduced a new way of governing and ruling and controlling the world. He tells us that there'll be this charismatic, unifying leader who will promise, according to Paul to the Thessalonians, peace and safety. It's particularly this word peace or safety in the original, which means stability, security, safe from enemies and dangers. That there'll be this one who will say, I'm going to fix everything that's wrong and make it all work the way it's supposed to. But there is something different about the times I believe that we're in, because we're seeing the global dimension of these affairs and these effects. Now, the question that often arises is there any evidence that anything like this is happening today, that we are moving towards this kind of system?